Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is Monday, which means it is Murder Mystery Monday. This case is going to be a solved case. It's actually pretty well known. I've seen a couple of videos of it being around, like just out there, but I've been thinking about it a lot and like heavily invested into it, so I just decided to go ahead and commit and make a video on it. Want to give a disclaimer that this is a case that happened in Hong Kong, so if I mispronounce anything at all, I mean no disrespect, I just not really able to pronounce it very well, and I am so sorry. No disrespect to the victims or anything like that, or the victim. So lighting's a little bit weird right now. It was super sunny, and then out of nowhere, we're having a thunderstorm. So if you happen to hear any thunder or anything like that, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try to get this video done as quick as I can before it starts getting real bad. So this is the case of the Hello Kitty murder, and you're probably wondering, why is it called the Hello Kitty murder? Well, we'll get into that. So in 1999, a 14-year-old girl came into a police station talking about how she was being haunted by a ghost. Now, the police were like, we don't really deal with paranormal things. Why are you coming in here to tell us that, But they did let her tell her story. And from her story, they were able to uncover this heinous murder that happened. So the 14-year-old girl's name is obviously hidden for her own security because she is a child. But she came in and told them that she was part of the murder and torture of a woman named Fan Man Yi. I'm probably saying her name wrong. I'm so sorry. So Fan Man Yi her life was not the best from beginning until she just did not have the best life. She was pretty much like abandoned from the time she was born. She spent most of her life in an orphanage. They found her on the street, and then she was in the orphanage until she was 16 years old. And in Hong Kong, once you turn 16 years old, you basically have to fend for yourself. Obviously, a 16-year-old is not going to be able to fend for themselves, so she ended up turning to petty crimes, prostitution, and eventually drug use. She was working at a nightclub as a hostess, and when you say that, you think like a regular hostess that takes somebody to their seat or something. No, she was a sex worker. At this nightclub, she ended up meeting her husband, who was also addicted to drugs. And apparently their marriage was not very good either. There were several reports from their neighbors saying that they heard a lot of screaming and fighting coming out of their apartment. They did end up having a child together, and when Fan Man Yi was abducted, her child was 2 years old. So he was very, very little when this happened. You can't really find out. They don't really go into detail about what happened to her husband, but Fan Man Yi eventually went to work for a brothel. So at this brothel, she ended up meeting a man named Chan Man Lok. Again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And he ended up favoring Fan Man Yi. Every time he would go in, he would specifically ask for her, and they would actually be together for a long periods of time, and they would also use drugs together while he was with her. At some point, Fan Man Yi thought that it would be a good idea to try to steal his wallet, and because it was just them in there, she was found out, and he was pissed. Chan Man Lok was part of a group called the Triads, which is basically like a Hong Kong mafia. Like they're pretty like gangsters. So he knew a lot of powerful people. When Fun Money stole his wallet, he ended up finding out, obviously, and so he wanted her to pay him back. So she stole about $4,000, and she did pay him back, and then she paid him back with interest. So she paid him back about $10,000 more. But Chan Man Lok was not satisfied with that, so he wanted $16,000 more. Obviously, Fan Monyi was going to have a hard time doing that because she was still trying to provide for her son. So, wanting to leave the brothel to get away from Chan Man Lok, she turned back to the streets for prostitution. Chan Man Lok ended up finding out where she was at, and he sent two of his guys to go and basically take her, abduct her. They grabbed her and they took her to an apartment flat that belonged to Chan Man Lok. And there he had decided that he was going to open up his own small brothel with just her. And he was basically going to make her work until her debt was paid off. But every time it got close to her debt being paid off, he wasn't satisfied and he wanted more money. At some point, he decided that instead of keeping this whole brothel thing going, that he was just going to start beating on her. So him and his group of guys and the 14-year-old girl who ended up being Chan Man Lok's girlfriend. So Chan Man Lok was 32 and she was like 13. So not only was he like a really violent person and like a drug addict, but he was also a pedophile. So they all partook in the abuse and torture of Fan Monyi. So the first bit of abuse started with just beating her with their bare hands, and then eventually they got tired of that, and that's when the real torture started. So with the first bits of torture, like I said, they would beat her with their bare hands, and then they moved on to metal poles and furniture. Before I go on with describing this torture, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but if you are someone that is very sensitive to hearing about torture, I would suggest skipping through. I will try to put a timestamp down here somewhere so you can skip towards that, or you can exit the video if you'd like. But I will definitely leave a timestamp to where I'm not talking about the torture anymore. They would torture her with furniture, whatever that means, and then it only got worse. They started burning like plastic on her feet, and it would cause her feet to blister. And they would take spicy chili oil and they would rub it into her wounds. While they were doing that, they would make her laugh and smile and tell them how much she enjoyed it. From there, they would eventually start burning her with cigarettes, and they would continue to beat her with poles. They would mutilate and electrocute her genital area. They would pee on her, and there was even an instant where the 14-year-old girl defecated in a shoebox and made Fan Monyi eat it just because. Eventually, from all the beating and the burning of her feet, she really wasn't able to handle it anymore, and her body was kind of giving up on her. But they weren't done torturing her. So what they ended up doing is they took electrical wire and they hung her from the ceiling fan and basically used her as a punching bag. So they would take turns hitting her and beating her with the poles, burning her, just torturing her in the worst ways possible. When they weren't torturing her, they were binging out on drugs and playing video games, and then when they got bored of the video games, they would go back into this room and continue to torture her and kick her and beat her and spit on her and pee on her. And then when they got bored of doing that, they would go back to their video games and drug use. These beatings and this torture went on for a month, and then one morning the teenage girl woke up and she found Fan Monyi dead in the bathtub. Apparently all of them were shocked. I guess they thought that they would just be able to keep beating her and nothing bad was going to happen, like she was just going to recover from it. But they were genuinely surprised that she died, and so they needed to figure out what they were going to do with the body. So they left her body in the bathtub for like 2 days while they decided what they were going to do with her body. After the 2 days, Chawn Man-luk finally said, all right, this is what we're going to do. So they, like I said, her body was in the bathtub. They took a saw and they cut her body up into a bunch of little pieces, and because they didn't want the smell to tip people off, they took her body parts and boiled it and then put it in the fridge. And because they wanted to dispose of everything and they wanted to hide everything, they took her head and they put her head in a giant pot of boiling water and they boiled it for like 2 days just so all the meat would fall off of the bone. And what's really disgusting is they would, at some point they got hungry while all this was going on, so they made noodles in a pot right next to the pot that was boiling, that they were using to boil her head. And they would use the same spoon to stir her head and their noodles. After the 2 days of the boiling of her head, they grabbed her skull, and the reason why they call it the Hello Kitty murder is because they took her skull and they put it in a Hello Kitty, like it was like a pillow type thing, so it was like a Hello Kitty with like a mermaid's tail. I'll try to insert a picture somewhere so you guys can see it. But they stuffed her head into that stuffed animal and they sewed it up. And like I said, they took her body, like the rest of her body, like the meat, and they had it in a fridge, and eventually they ended up feeding that meat to like stray animals, and they also fed it to the homeless. So after all that had happened, the 14-year-old girl started getting like, she believed that it was Fan Man-yi's ghost that was haunting her, and she felt like she couldn't keep it a secret anymore and she had to go and tell the police. So she went and told them, and they went to the apartment flat, and sure enough, they were able to find the Hello Kitty doll with her skull. They found one of her teeth, and they also found, I believe it was but they ended up finding all this in Chawn Man-luk's apartment flat. They went and got Chawn Man-luk and the people that were involved in the torture. And because they didn't have a body, they weren't able to have a definite, like they didn't have concrete evidence that she was tortured by them. Their story was, Chawn Man-luk's story was that that all this was consensual. She had decided that she was going to work for them as a brothel, and she died from a drug overdose. That's what they told police. And because there was, like I said, there was no body, there was no physical proof, they couldn't charge them with murder. So they ended up charging them with manslaughter, and they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. Now this is in 1999, so after the 20 years, they were allowed to go, to ask for parole. I haven't found any like recent news about what has happened with them, whether they got parole or not. So they might still be in jail, but what happened with that building that she ended up being tortured in is a lot of people ended up going there because they heard about this. I mean, obviously this was like big news in Hong Kong. So people would go there and they would try to like contact Fan Man-yi, and it actually started getting pretty malicious, and so they decided to demolish the building. And then once they demolished that building, they built another building on top of it, like a hotel. So they demolished the building in 2012, and then a few years later they ended up building a hotel there. Fan Man-yi's son, obviously he doesn't really have that great of a memory of his mother. He does still wear one of his necklaces. I guess the cops came and gave him a necklace, so he still wears his mother's necklace. So that was the case of the Hello Kitty murder. If anybody else wants to look into this case a little bit further and you want to like read some more of the stuff for yourself. Like I said, I wasn't going to go into great detail about the torture and what they did to her. If you guys want to look into it, I would just say tread lightly. There are some photos online that are pretty gruesome. So if you're super sensitive to like that kind of stuff, just don't Google image search anything. And always, most of the articles that you will find will give a warning in the beginning, you know, like graphic content. Just be careful with what you look at. It goes with any case, you know, just tread lightly, be careful. There's some gruesome stuff out there, so just gotta be careful. How many times can I say be careful before it gets obnoxious? Anyway, thank you guys so much for visiting my channel. I do videos like this every Monday. I also do family style vlogs on Wednesdays, and I just started a Fab Friday video series where I take looks from Pinterest and I try to recreate them on my channel. So if you are interested in true crime, family vlogs, and makeup, I suggest you guys hit the subscribe button and leave a like if you'd like to see more videos like this. And I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.